The officer pushed the form back across the counter before he had finished reading it. "There's no record like that in the system," Wade Harlan said. "You can head on out." The woman on the other side of the glass didn't move. She wore a dark coat and carried herself with calm composure, middle-aged, holding a thin folder against her side. "I filed an incident report here not long ago," she said. "It has a case number. Pull it up for me." Harlan gave a small shrug, the kind that suggested the conversation was already over in his mind. "The system's not showing anything. People like you come in here all the time saying they filed something. I've got to be careful." Behind the woman, a man in a work jacket stepped up. He was white, ordinary-looking, holding a parking ticket. Harlan's whole manner changed in an instant. "Sure, let me grab that for you, sir. Have a seat. It won't take a minute." He waved him toward a chair like an old friend. Elena Ward watched all of it. She was middle-aged and had not come to that counter as a stranger to it. She was an investigator with the office that oversaw how this department handled citizen complaints. She was running an audit on exactly that. How this building treated the people who walked through its doors with a problem and no power. She had filed a small report a short while earlier under her own name on purpose to see what happened to it. Now she knew. She didn't say any of that. She had learned a long time ago that speaking too soon only handed people the story they already wanted to tell. Instead, she filed it away in her mind, the way she filed everything, in order, for later. The time, the badge number on his chest, the name on the plate, Harlan. Because she knew something he didn't. A real report didn't vanish. It sat in the system with a case number and a timestamp. And if the counter claimed there was no record while the record was still there, that wasn't a memory problem. That was someone deciding the truth was easier to deny than to pull up. "I'd like you to log the reason you're refusing," Elena said, "and give me the receipt number for the complaint I'm filing now." Harlan didn't log anything. "We'll note what we note." A second officer drifted over from behind the desk, younger, watching Harlan the way a man watches someone he's trying to copy. Brody Nash didn't say much. He just stood close, arms folded, backing the older man with his presence. Elena slid a complaint form through the slot anyway, filled out in clear, plain handwriting. Harlan took it with 2 fingers, as if it were already trash, and set it on a pile down the counter. A civilian clerk at a records terminal glanced up once, then back at her screen. Nia Ellis had worked that desk for years. She knew what was in the system and what wasn't, and she had watched forms land on that pile and never come back. She didn't say anything, either. Not yet. In the lobby chairs, one other person was waiting, an older woman who had heard the whole exchange. She looked at Elena, then down at her own hands. She didn't speak. Elena noticed her, the way she noticed everyone who decided that silence was the safer choice. A sergeant came out of the back, heavy-set, calm in the way of a man who ran things and knew it. Marcus Lang glanced at the form on the pile, then at Harlan, and the two of them traded a look Elena had seen in a dozen buildings like this. The look that said, "Handle it. It's nothing." "Ma'am," Lang said, not unkind, just final. "If the system doesn't show your report, there's not much we can do today. You can always come back." "What direction do you want logged for the refusal?" Elena asked. Lang didn't answer that. He just nodded toward the door. The way you nod at someone you've already decided isn't going to be a problem for long. Harlan leaned an elbow on the counter. "Easy now, sure it's over. People like you file something and give up before long anyway," he said. Elena didn't take the bait. She picked up her folder, thanked no one, and walked out into the cold. She sat in her car for a moment, both hands on the wheel, and didn't write down her anger. She wrote down facts, the time, the badge number, the exact words, the clerk who had looked up and looked away, the form going onto the pile. Then she opened her laptop and sent one short message to her office. Preserve the complaint disposition log and the audit trail for this front counter, and the original intake record before anyone writes over it. Because the report was still in that system, she already knew it. She just needed the record to say so, in its own cold voice, so no one could call it her word against a badge. She investigated how this department buried complaints for a living, and she had just watched it bury one of hers in almost no time at all. They had picked the wrong woman to tell there was no record. The complaint went exactly where Marcus Lang sent everything he didn't want to deal with, which was the first thing that told Elena he had done it many times before. By the following morning, her own filing had a disposition on it, unfounded, closed almost immediately after she had handed it through the slot. No interview, no review, no notice. That wasn't a decision. That was a man clicking a button to make a person disappear from the record. The files came back to her over the next few days, and one by one they took the machine apart. The disposition log came first. She read it twice to be sure. Page after page of citizen complaints closed unfounded almost immediately after being filed. Almost all of them run through one account, Lang's. The same clean little move, over and over. A complaint comes in, a complaint dies, and the paperwork looks tidy enough that no one upstairs ever asks. The audit trail came next, and it was worse for them. The report Elena had filed a short while earlier, the one Harlan had sworn the system didn't show, was right there. It had never left. Case number, timestamp, intact. The counter had said no record while the record sat in the database the whole time. Then the flag. Someone had marked her account disruptive. Frequent filer, by hand. The same morning she was turned away, just in time to justify refusing her. A label typed on after the fact to make the refusal look like procedure. But a lie that works once tends to get used again. So Elena kept pulling. She didn't count arrests. She traced a sharper shape. She found a long line of complaints from black residents, closed the same way, almost immediately. No investigation. Everyone marked unfounded. The people behind them written off as having given up. It wasn't a backlog. It was a pipeline, and it ran one direction, straight into a drawer nobody opened. She wrote the names in a notebook. Then she started calling them. Rosa Delgado answered on the second ring. She had come into that same lobby some years earlier to report something, and she had been told there was no record, sent home, and later found her complaint had been closed before she reached her car. I stopped trying, Rosa said. Her voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Nobody was going to take my word over theirs. Mine had nothing on it. Mine has a closed file on it now, too, Elena said. Would you tell a review officer what happened to you? Rosa was quiet a second. If you think it'll change anything, it will. The last piece came from inside the building. Nia Ellis worked the records terminal, and she had watched those forms hit the pile for years. She knew what was in the system. She knew the report Elena filed was still in there, and she knew exactly how many complaints had been closed almost immediately by one sergeant. So Nia did the one thing that couldn't be undone. She preserved the original intake log, the raw record of every complaint that came across that counter, and noted in writing that it was complete before anyone with a reason could touch it. When Elena asked her later why, after all this time, Nia's answer was short. I've watched those forms disappear for years, she said. I just never had a reason on the table. I couldn't pretend not to see. Through all of it, Elena said nothing about who she was. To Harlan, to Lang, to the union, she was a middle-aged woman with a closed complaint and no pull. Her strength so far was only this. She knew which records existed, and she knew how to keep them from being written over. She asked the questions of someone who knew the complaint system from the inside. Who has the access to close a disposition? Is the officer named in a complaint allowed to close it himself? What's the policy for logging a reason when you refuse a records request? Harlan had no clean answers. Lang had fewer. The matter didn't go to a public hearing with the stage to perform on. It went to an integrity review of how this counter handled complaints. Not one filing, but a pattern of them. And Elena's office filed a formal preservation demand the same morning. When the review opened, Lang spoke first, steady and sure. A sergeant with many years of service behind him. He described a tidy operation, complaints reviewed properly, nothing closed that shouldn't have been. A frequent filer who'd been handled by the book. At the table across from him, Elena reached for a single page and asked the review officer for permission to put one record on the screen. The disposition log. The column of complaints closed unfounded almost immediately after they came in. His own department was about to call him a liar in its own cold ink. The disposition log filled the screen, and the room read what Marcus Lang had been sure no one ever would. Complaint after complaint. Closed unfounded, almost immediately after filing. No interviews, no notice, all run through one account. Beside it, Elena put the audit trail, and there sat the report Harlan had sworn the system didn't show. Still in the database, case number and timestamp intact. The whole time he was telling her there was no record. The sergeant who'd built the tidy little operation had built it crooked, and the system had quietly kept the proof all along. No one spoke. The quiet that settled over the review room was a slower, heavier thing. The quiet of people watching a story they'd been sure of come apart line by line. The review officer lowered her glasses. "Sergeant, these complaints are closed almost immediately after intake, with no investigation logged. The complainant's own report was in the system, while the counter reported no record. The disruptive flag was added by hand the same morning she was refused. Can you reconcile any of that for this review?" Lang opened his mouth. Nothing came out clean. Then the review officer asked Elena the routine question she asked everyone. "For the record, your occupation." Elena stood. She didn't reach for a card. She didn't let the moment swell. "I'm an investigator with the office that oversees this department's complaint process," she said, plain and even. "I've been auditing how citizen complaints are handled at this counter. I filed one myself under my own name to see what happened to it." No one gasped. The room didn't freeze. The quiet that came instead was a slower thing. The quiet of two men understanding piece by piece that every complaint they'd closed with a click had just been laid open. And there was the turn of it. The disruptive flag and the almost immediate, unfounded disposition they'd typed so confidently to make her disappear were now the proof of falsified records that would bury them. They had handed her the case themselves. "I want to be clear about something," Elena said, turning to Lang, her voice steady and without heat. "You didn't bury this complaint because I did anything wrong. You buried it because you believed I was someone who could be erased without anyone checking. The people before me couldn't read a disposition log. They just got told there was no record, and they went home. I read the record. That's the only difference between me and them." Lang tried the way men do when the floor gives out. "I've got many years in this department. I followed procedure. I've got people who vouch for how I run this desk." "The people you're naming," the review officer said quietly, "are exactly who will be asking why dozens of complaints were closed unfounded almost immediately after filing." Lang's authority to close complaints was pulled that day, and his conduct referred for prosecution, not as a personnel matter, but as falsifying public records. Harlan tried the only thing he had left. "I told her what the system showed me," he said. "If it didn't come up, it didn't come up." The review officer turned the audit trail toward him, the report sitting in the database, time-stamped. The whole time he'd stood at that counter, swearing it wasn't there. "It came up," she said. "You told her it didn't. Then you flagged her for asking twice." The denial he'd been so sure no one could check now sat in the record next to the proof against it. His authority to flag accounts was pulled, and his conduct referred alongside Lang's. The lie had been easy to say to a woman he thought no one would believe. It did not survive being laid beside the file. The consequences didn't come down like a hammer. They came in plain, hard steps. An independent investigator, Quentin Hale, took over. No friends or favors owed in the building. The audit signed off by Inspector General Camille Reed pulled every complaint closed the same way. The pattern showed up in the data plane as the timestamps. Complaints from black residents shut down almost immediately, over and over. Brody Nash, the younger officer who'd backed Harlan at the counter, confirmed how the desk really worked once he was questioned alone, and his cooperation was noted as a reason for a lighter outcome. Rosa Delgado's old complaint, closed some years earlier the same way, was reopened and finally worked, and the matter underneath it looked at for the first time. She called Elena the morning the letter came, her voice unsteady, not with grief, but with the shock of something she'd stopped believing in finally happening. "They're actually looking at it," Rosa said. "I know," Elena said. The counter changed what had let it happen. Citizen complaints had to go through an independent intake. An officer named in a complaint could no longer close it. A refused records request had to log a reason that could be checked. Elena asked for none of it as a prize. She asked for two things: that the false flag come off her account and her report be restored, and that the pattern be stopped. Both were done. Nia Ellis, who'd preserved the intake log, and Rosa, who'd agreed to tell it again, were both named in the file for telling the truth when it would have been easier not to. And that was the thing that stayed with her. None of it would have moved if everyone had stayed quiet. A lobby full of people had watched her get turned away with a flat, no record, and said nothing. Nia was the one who finally handed over the log. Rosa was the one who filed her words again after swallowing them for years. The record cracked it open, but a record only matters when someone decides to stop looking away. On the screen in the review room before they cleared it, the column of almost immediate closing still sat beside the report marked "No Record" that had been in the system the whole time. Back at her office, a banker's box waited on the table, full of names ready to be reopened. Elena rested her hand on the lid of it, not on anyone's badge. A complaint closed almost immediately still left a timestamp on the system clock. That timestamp said more than any handled by the book ever could. Elena never needed anyone to know who she was to be believed. She only wanted the next person who walked up to that counter to have a record that could speak for them, too.